At I4CP, as you all know, we discover the people practices that drive high performance, and we are here to help you see what's coming around the curve. And that's a big part of what this call series in particular is about. Everything that we do at I4CP is rooted in high performance organizations. So we want to spend just a little bit of time defining that. Our research analysts conduct our research studies, and they look at organizations that excel in 4 key areas: revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfactions. We're not only looking at what high performance organizations do differently than low performing organizations, and 99% of the time, there is a big difference. But we use regression analysis to determine what specific practices are providing that bottom line business impact. And we're looking at that over a 5-year horizon. So as we go into this call, excited to explore the high performances in DE&I at BMO. We want to thank all of our members that are on the call today. We have some incredible logos, incredible range of industries and global industries and companies here as well. If you're not a member yet, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to have you and have you join even more of our discussions. Just letting you know our upcoming calls in the next practice series. Our next call coming up in May is going to be with Michael Killingsworth. He's the head of learning for U.S. Personal Banking, and Allison Stifkin, director of learning and program execution at Citi as well. Later on in May, we'll have Brandon Roberts joining us. He's the Group Vice President of People Analytics and AI at ServiceNow. And then rounding out later in the month with Rob Wellen, the Managing Director of Data and AI at BDO Digital. I'm excited now to introduce my co-hosts on this call, Eric Davis. He's the Creative Director and Senior Editor at I4CP, and Jackie Robertson, who's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Cleveland Clinic and the Chair of I4CP's CDO Board, which is now our largest board community. So if you're interested in finding out more about our Chief Diversity Officer Board, please reach out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nina. Welcome, everyone, to those of you who are joining us online. We've got a great agenda today. I'm so excited. I can't wait to jump into it. And Nina, thank you for your comments about our CDO board being the largest board. We've got some great contributors, and certainly look forward to hearing from more of you. Speaking of you, you all drive our agenda. Today, we are going to be digging in with our Chief Diversity and Inclusion, or Chief Inclusion Officer, Vanessa Lewerentz from BMO, on a topic that many of you and many people on our board have continued to ask questions around, and this whole notion of self-ID. Vanessa, you've done a wonderful job with this, and I know that it's taken some time, and I can't wait to dig in, but the quote that you chose was just intriguing. I love the quote, and it just reminds me of just kind of taking things a moment at a time. But tell us a little bit more about why you selected that quote. Why is it meaningful for you?
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks everyone for having me today. That quote means a lot to me because deep down, it's like it's one step at a time. But if you don't take this step and you don't like put your toe in the water or try to influence change, you're just going to stay in the same spot. And so it's like taking that. I may not know what the end, I may have a vision, but I don't know. I haven't seen the end yet, but we take one moment at a time and take action one moment at a time together. And that's how we're going to reach whatever that pinnacle is. So it just resonated for me years ago when I first read it.
I love that. I mean, it also has the propensity to make you not feel so overwhelmed at times by just being willing to take that first step. And for those of us, and I admit I'm one of those people, I want to have the whole thing figured out first before I take that first step. So I love that quote. Thank you so much. So let's get started. Let's dig in a little bit and give the audience a bit of context around Bank of Montreal for those who might not be as familiar with it. Can you talk to us just a little bit about, the Bank of Montreal, just high level, what markets are you in, number of employees, locations, etc.?
Happy to, Jackie. So proud of BMO Financial Group. We're the eighth largest bank in North America, and we operate across Canada and in 32 states in the US since our recent acquisition last year of Bank of the West is now part of the BMO family. We operate in the UK, Ireland, and across Asia as well. Our international footprint is a smaller footprint, but so we consider ourselves a North American bank with international presence and continuing to grow. We have, if you want to go to the next slide, we have about 13 million customers, and our employee population is now about 55,000 employees. And we're going strong as we continue to evolve and develop as an organization. We are purpose-driven and values, and underpinned by our strong values. And our purpose is really to boldly grow the good in business and in life. And at BMO, culture and talent is critical to that from an inclusion perspective with our colleagues, our customers, and our communities. And if you go to the next slide, we're really focused on building our values and ingraining our values across the organization at all levels of the organization, founded in integrity and responsibility, and leading with empathy and learning from everyone's differences. That's how you get better as an organization. And that's where we focused in on. Our head office is in Toronto, Canada. Originally, we started 206 years ago in Montreal, Canada. And now our US head office is in Chicago, and we have a sort of a subsidiary head office in San Francisco with the acquisition of our Bank of the West colleagues, which has been fantastic.
Well, thank you for that. I really like the fact that you are purpose-driven. I love how you are living your values, which we're going to get into a little bit in a minute here. But before doing that, I want this audience to learn a little bit more about you. Tell us about, what has your career journey been? How long have you been in this role? Any strategic initiatives leading up to the Self-ID program, which, by the way, I love the name, Count Me In. But talk to us a little bit about your career journey. How did you get here?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So I am a career HR professional. I started my career actually in the music industry, and then I moved into the banking sector. Most of my career has been in total rewards, focused on executive compensation, incentive comp, governance, all that fun stuff. And I've worked for 3 Canadian banks. So this is my second time at BMO. I worked at BMO, went to 2 other Canadian banks in between, and then I came back home to BMO just over 4 years ago in the executive compensation. And 3 years ago, I was asked if I would be interested in this role as the Chief Inclusion Officer for the organization, understanding that we have a long history in inclusion dating back to 1967 when we appointed a first head of a woman, head of a director in a chartered bank. So we have a very long history that is deep rooted for inclusion across for internally, but also with our customers and deep community partnerships. And so that's how I ended up in this capacity. And it's been a challenge, especially with the external environment that we've all been talking about, and also with the commitment of leaders in our organization as well.
No, thank you for that. When I think about the history that BMO has had around inclusion, I can't help but wonder, and I'm not going to specifically ask you this question yet, but I can't help but wonder if that made it easier for you to move forward with this Count Me In program. I'm going to get into that with you a little bit later on, but I want to dig into that right now, the Count Me In program. Why was this self-ID an issue that you chose to tackle? I think a lot of us in the US are probably in the earlier stages of this. You've been at this for a lot longer, but why was self-ID an issue that chose to tackle, and what really makes it so important for your DE&I program for the organization. Clearly, you all have a history of inclusion. So if you can just kind of weave in how that history of focus on inclusion has helped, but certainly tell us why this self-ID was an issue you chose to tackle.
That's great. It's a great question. If you want to go to the next slide, this talks a little bit about our journey in D&I, and it actually predates 2011. That, as I indicated, our first direct female director, woman director in a chartered bank. With self-ID, we actually started self-ID back in 2011, and it's important for us to understand our workforce. Because our focus is on the communities we're serving. We want to ensure that our workforce reflects the communities we serve with, so on the branch level, digital footprint, but also be an employer of choice. And understanding our employees, we can provide initiatives, programs, be it wellness programs, based on the data that we have in research about what areas that we need to focus on as an organization, as well as broadly in our products and our services and our commercial practices, and how we can address communities that may have been underserved or underrepresented as well. And so 2011 is when we first started our first self-ID campaign. And limited scope in numbers are every year we get stronger and stronger. And in the last 3 years, and this journey really talks about our evolution as an organization. Self-ID is part of, it's not the driver of. And that's critically important that we have an integrated approach as we build from the business case to how do we remove barriers that may or may not, that exist. And how do we deepen the focus across the organization without understanding our representation. Also, the representation out in society, like where's the talent as well. So we look at external as well as internal, but self-ID is really how we can understand what our workforce, how our workforce is made up, and are we reflecting the communities that we serve. And that's how we've powered into Zero Barriers to Inclusion 2025. We look at this on a multi-year, as you can see, a multi-year perspective. And how do we build an inclusive society, which is one of our core principles, thriving economy, without understanding our employees and what drives them, and where some opportunities that we have to moving forward, and really focused on the employee experience, but also our customer experience, both digital and in our branch networks.
That is so spot on. Just really that opportunity to get to know who your workforce is. I also think the fact that you started so much earlier than perhaps other companies in the US gives me hope and motivation, knowing that this has been a longer journey for you. But before we get into that process and what that journey entailed, I want to just ask a high-level question. What impact, Vanessa, have you seen with this program?
The biggest impact I have seen is psychological safety of our employees to show up as their best selves at work, being innovative, speaking up when they see opportunities for us to do better. We, as every other organization, this is continual growth. We've made significant progress, and there's always more progress to make. And that's why we look at it from a multi-year perspective. This isn't a once and done initiative or a program. This is part of our culture at BMO. From the time that you apply for a role, through onboarding, and through your entire life cycle, it's important to understand where we're at as an organization and how we can best serve our employees, but also serve our communities.
Thank you for that. I think, some of us still struggle with, and maybe it's just the notion around trust, actually getting people to self-ID, trusting the system, trusting the organization enough to know what this information is going to be used for, etc. I've been so impressed with the numbers that, or the groundswell you've had since the inception of this program. But could you share with us, Vanessa, the numbers, if you have them, around the percent of people who chose to self-ID?
Absolutely. So we do a campaign every year. And so our campaign last year, a number of people that went into our question, we call it a questionnaire, not a survey, by the way.
Okay.
So language is important. This is a questionnaire because it's voluntary. We had over 86% of our employees go into the questionnaire, whether they changed anything or net new, or decided to consent to share. So there's two aspects to our survey. It's consent to share your individual data, and it's a very finite group within HR that have it, and it's only for use in HR initiatives or programs. If we're doing a listening session, that is actually that we feel is very important for the organization moving forward. So it's one of the ways we build trust is that we have very strong data governance on the data. How people identify is very closely held and very, very much protected, just like our client data. And that has made a big difference in ensuring that we have tight controls over individual data. The data is actually used in aggregate for our planning, for initiatives and programs. But when we get to the individual data, their employees need to, if they want to share that information, they have to consent to share. If they don't consent to share, they can still complete the questionnaire and self-ID and be included, because that's the beauty of Count Me In. You're counting in for yourself, for your colleagues, and then for us overall as an organization as we move forward with our strategy and our purpose.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So how did you roll this out, and how did you socialize it? How did you roll it out, and how did you socialize it? And what were some of the most important components that this audience should be aware of, or any lessons learned when you rolled this out?
Absolutely. And if you go to the next slide, there's a high-level summary of our approach for self-ID. And we really, because we've started for a long time in the self-ID realm, in the last 3 years, we've branded it to Count Me In, for me, for us, for everyone. And part of that role, our approach is really founded on 4 things: that it's leader-led and employee-driven. And I could talk to you a little bit about that. Technology is critically important. Governance, as I just mentioned, about how do we manage that data, and how do we ensure that that it's protected just like our customer data. And the other is change management and the communications plan, the tools that we use, including leader guides, tip sheets on if you're running huddles, and providing our leaders with speaking points as to why self-ID is an important part of our culture here at BMO. But also we do a lot of storytelling with leaders and employees across all levels, all demographic makeups, to say, why do I count myself in, and make it personal. And it's not necessarily those that are underrepresented. We have the wide swath of employees who identify in different ways. And why do they identify? And that has really helped build trust, because they're hearing from employees. It's not an HR program. It is a part of BMO on self-ID. But technology is really important. We need to make it accessible and easy for employees to go in at any point in time in their career journey to self-ID. And so we've founded that, our technology, in our Workday solution, which is our human capital management system. And and we also have what are our outcomes? Why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. And being very transparent on the purpose and what do we want to inspire people to self-ID, self-advocate, share their stories, and reinforce why and how we're going to use that data. And the data is to be used for good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And deepen trust. And trust is built over time. So it's not a once and done. As I mentioned earlier, we started a long time ago with self-ID back to 2011. And so you build trust over time. And so in the last 3 years, because we have done a concerted effort, because we were listening to our employees, it's like, well, why should I? Why should I? And so we've deepened that storytelling as to why. And it's not just for the organization, it's for each one of us. It's part of our purpose, it's part of our values. And I always go back, that is our touchstone, is our purpose and our values.
Mm-hmm.
And also build awareness of that we're an organization that want to be more inclusive, and we're on that journey.
This is amazing work that you've done, Vanessa. And I want to just take a pause at this point and ask Nina if there's any questions or comments from the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jackie. I think, like we expected, there are a lot of questions from the audience when it comes to your work on this, Vanessa, and people are definitely eager for more details and are just really, really impressed by what you're doing. Going back to just how you started this conversation, I got a private message in here about diversity being in your organizational core values, and wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about how that got prioritized to the level of being in your top 4 core values.
That's a great question. It predates me, but I have been part of the conversations on the word diversity. It is a core value because we learn from differences. I know diversity has been positioned in different ways, particularly of recent, as a fact, but we actually, our core foundation is learning from difference in that. And so if you do the double click down, that includes equity, equitable opportunity for advancement and career development, as well as inclusion and belonging, a sense of belonging and trust. So that's why diversity and empathy are our foundation to our values. I don't know, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. If we get a follow-up on that, I'll definitely surface this. Eric, did you have a?
Yeah, and kind of related. It was from one of our team members, but it was curious how you sustain the focus, even when there are leadership changes, because your program's been around for so long, with shifting priorities over time. And I think having it as a value probably is a big part of that, but
I think it's part of the values and part of who we are. It does, irrespective of the leadership, because that's part of, when you come to work at BMO, part of our value proposition for all of our employees. And it ebbs and flows, I'm going to be honest. But in the last 3 years, we've made a very concerted effort, and part of that is listening to our employees. What do they want to know? What are they looking for? Self-ID is one aspect of that. Management changes, but this is a foundation to who we are, and it's embedded in our kind of our DNA, we like to say.
Thank you.
And
when it comes to the structure of what you're measuring, what are people self-identifying? So what are those demographics that you're going to? How are you including global diversity dimensions in that? Could you tell us a little bit more detail on that?
Great. Great question. Our self-ID program is for North American employees at this point. And we always start with what are we required from a regulatory perspective, because we're in a highly regulated industry. And then we also, and back to listening to our employees, how do you want, what other segments can we look at from a sub-segment perspective? So the core definitions are gender, both assigned and gender identity, race and ethnicity, Indigenous status in Canada at this point, and disability, sexual orientation, and military status in Canada, and also then referred to in the US as veteran status. And underneath like race and ethnicity, we have subsegments that are required to be reported both in Canada and the US. And we have listened to our employees. Our employee resource groups have been invaluable in helping us define further the subsegments. And for people to show up as their authentic self, they want to have the opportunity to. So we've got the higher level ones, and then we have the subsegment ones. Our BMO Pride ERG has provided significant advice and counsel on sexual orientation, gender identity, subsegments as well.
We also had another question on measurement, as long as we're on the topic, was how do you measure psychological safety? I know that a lot, we have one response on that question that they do through engagement surveys, but I didn't know if you went deeper with like listening groups, focus groups, things like that, or if what other kind of metrics you might have around that.
I think there's multiple metrics that we use. Listening sessions is one way, how open people are. We use engagement survey. So we've an engagement survey, and there's a couple of questions on there that talk about, do you feel included at the bank? Do you feel that your career can aspire at the bank? We also have an anonymous speak up line as well, that if there's something of concern. And so how employees are using the speak up line, because that's specifically anonymous as well. And then we also use, through our employee resource groups, lots of feedback, right? And also when we look at the outcomes of the self-ID, if we're seeing more and more employees going into the questionnaire, making consenting to share is also another aspect of psychological safety that we measure. So after last year's campaign, we saw a 30% increase in employees consenting to share. So we already had a very solid base of employees saying, yes, I consent to share my data, but we saw a 30% increase. For us, that's an indicator that employees are feeling more psychologically safe to self-ID. And so we have multiple prongs as well.
So participation itself is a big metric. And do you disaggregate your employee engagement data based on some of the self-ID responses?
Where we can, but we have thresholds. We have thresholds because it's all an aggregate to start measuring over time. And that's a newer metric that we're looking at, just to say, we've got indicators of psychological safety. And so for an example, Eric, when I started in this role, I had employees come to me and say, I will never self-ID.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year or two later, it comes like, I self-ID'd, and I'm proud to do that. Those are the moments that matter. For me, is on an individual basis, is like, I am comfortable. I get it. I get why we're doing it. And I know that you're protecting my data. And those have been things.
Do you have particular groups that you think are more resistant when it comes to self-ID in the workplace? Certain groups that you have to target maybe a little more or work a little harder to get that self-ID?
I wouldn't say there are specific segments. Everybody are human. They may have had previous experiences. So there isn't one group in specific that I can say that we focus in on. We may have focus areas in our campaigns. One would be in the disability status. What does disability actually mean? Visible, invisible. And more explanation of things that we're finding that we do. Each campaign, we learn something new, and one of our measures is employee feedback. I need to understand this a little bit more. So that's how we focus. We don't focus on trying to find or look at a specific segment to say, we need to double down our efforts there. We look at what are we hearing, and from a lack of understanding, it's not clear. So like the disability form in both in Canada and the US, there's a lot of information in there. I learn every time I read it of something new. And it's a learning, it's building our own awareness as well.
You did bring up the category that I know I've heard from other members of our CDO board have been the most challenging for them, which is disability, because people, particularly in the workforce, don't like to talk about disabilities or things they can't do. It's a place where people tend to focus on what they can do, and then understanding that the psychological safety of the information that you're gathering and letting them know that this isn't something that's used against you, it's something that's used for you in the organization, can be the most important. Okay, Nina, did you see some other questions we can?
Yeah, I have a question. I love seeing that people are a part of your technology approach. It's great to see that in the category. And know that you've mentioned Workday. As usual with this audience, people love to know, what the technology platforms that you are using are and what those tools are. So beyond Workday, are there other platforms that you're using for both the intake, the data management, the engagement survey aspect of this?
No, Workday is our primary technology platform, and it's actually Workday Extend that is running the self-ID program now. When we started 3 years ago in really kind of doubling down our effort in self-ID, we actually used Qualtrics and brought the data over into Workday. And now we're continuing to evolve as the Workday product evolves. But that's our foundational from a digitization perspective that we use.
Thank you. And then I've got one last question, and this came in as a private message. And this person just has a little bit of confusion, perhaps, around what the difference between like the information that you're collecting on these employee demographics, so that's self-ID, and the psychological safety. So maybe as we've been talking through this, that's become a little bit conflated, at least for this person. And in case this is a question for more folks, could you just talk a little bit about, what you're doing to understand those different groups and the culture elements? Let me read the question as it stands. Are you asking engagement-like questions on psychological safety questions? Are you using that to understand how different groups feel about different elements of the company culture?
So we don't ask a question about psychological safety in our engagement survey. We ask about whether employees feel that they feel included at the organization, at the bank, whether they can aspire to build their careers here at BMO, that they believe in the BMO products and services that we provide on a commercial perspective as well. So that direct question isn't asked. What we do is we kind of look at the different elements, whether it's engagement, participation in self-ID is an indicator. It's not a direct question related to psychological safety. So when we're looking at what are the actions that employees take, the type of feedback that we get, the queries that we get, whether it's through the HR programs like self-ID or our engagement survey or our speak up line, that employees feel psychologically safe to participate, as well as provide feedback, asking questions as well. Hopefully that addressed the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that provided great clarity. That's a tool that you're using to really, reinforce this program and improve adoption of the program. So thank you for providing that clarity. And I know, Jackie, we've got so many more questions and conversations to explore together. So I'll turn it back over to you.
No, absolutely. This has been a great dialogue so far, Vanessa. Thank you so much. I guess I'm going to go back over one thing, and you probably answered it a little bit, but I'm thinking about for those who are just now beginning to start on this journey of putting a program and a process in on self-ID. What advice would you give in terms of initial resistance among employees choosing not to self-ID? I liken it back to your favorite quote, if you can't, don't try to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. So what motivational words or words of encouragement would you give for those who are starting off and they're not getting the participation that they originally thought they would?
I think it's goes back to transparency of why you're doing this. Why are you collecting this information on a voluntary basis? And really being transparent about that. And also understanding that, like the quote is, you take one step. It's a progress. We've made phenomenal impact within this organization and our self-ID, but it was built over time. But being transparent on the purpose, being transparent on how that data is going to be used and used for good, to build and ensure that it goes back to first principles. Why are you doing? Why and how is it aligned to your purpose as an organization? Why is it important? Just like why do we focus on inclusion and belonging in an organization? For us, it's to boldly grow the good in business and life. And for us, life is important. As an employee, and we're committed to our customers and our community partnerships. But it's really being transparent on why you're doing this, how that data is going to be used, and that how that data is being protected. Because we consider it confidential personal data.
It's interesting I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
As you talk about this, it makes me wonder, okay, clearly this is not a one and done program. Clearly this is not only linked to your values, but your workforce, your potential workforce. So how do you market this self-ID program? I'm sure you don't just do it once a year, and I'm sure that there's a complete strategy around how do you continue to market it? How do you continue to build that trust? What does that look like? I know it's not an email to folks saying, here's what we're doing and why. So talk to us about that. I know that there's a complete strategy around it.
Yeah, it's an always on strategy in reminding employees, whether it's in a signature line, you can always count yourself in and with a direct link. We have built a centralized information hub for employees to go to gather information, leaders and leader guides on how they can incorporate it into their town halls as reminders. Every employee resource group has an intranet site, and there's a section always about counting yourself in and why we count ourselves in and the purpose behind that. After every ERG event at the end, and we have over 170 events through annually that are delivered by our ERGs, and we have 11 ERGs, and now over 50% of our employees are members of our ERG program. We've seen exponential growth. After every ERG event, at the end, count yourself in. Remember to go count yourself in, and these are the reasons why. And because we've been able to brand it, there's pattern recognition about counting yourself in or going through the self-ID program. It is available because it's on Workday, it's available every day of the year, 365, 24/7, because we also know that how I may identify may change through my life cycle. And so want to provide that opportunity. So we provide reminders wherever we can. It's on our DEI intranet site. It's on ERG intranet sites. We build it into town halls. And the one important thing is to remember, our leaders are sending the message. They are carrying that message through every town hall, team meetings where it's applicable. And then every year we have an annual campaign. It's like a marketing campaign.
Wow.
And we refresh it with tools and resources for all of our employees and our managers to use, whether it's on the front lines or in the infrastructure of the organization. And we use different modes of reaching employees. And so it's like 90-second videos and they're available on our hub. You can go in and listen to one of your colleagues talk about why they count themselves in. And so we make it very personal. So it's accessible all through the year, and we build it into all of our storytelling, whether it's at a panel discussion, internally, externally. It is always top of mind.
I think that's brilliant. I think one of the questions that I had from a colleague at another organization was around, they anticipate based on the demographics external to their company that they might not have a large percentage of people whose gender identity is different. And so why devote so much time to what could be such a small percentage of their organization's population? What do you say to that?
I think an organization needs to make their own choices based on their purpose and their values. And for us, it's important because we also are listening to our employees. I think there's an opportunity to listen to employees. It may not be out in the kind of the sector that you're operating in or the environment, the region that you're operating in. But you also don't want to make assumptions about people either. Right. And so assumptions, it's not like, I know in the US, you can identify race and ethnicity. You don't always know how people identify, whether it's gender identity, sexual orientation in the workplace.
Love your response. I've seen some questions pop up in the chat. So Eric or Nina, do we want to go to those now?
Absolutely. We got a question about whether you are starting self-ID in the hiring process or whether that just kicks off in the onboarding process.
It kicks off in the onboarding process. And so from a technology perspective through the API, and then as employees join and through the onboarding, their data now is being transferred into our core system, our HCM system with Workday. However, part of onboarding is that they're going to get that questionnaire again because it's not as fulsome yet as when you're an employee. So that it's part of our onboarding roadmap. We call it onboarding roadmap. When every employee joins, that they're going to get that the questionnaire again.
Yeah. Is there any part of the psychological safety that's starting in the hiring process so that information starts to come in quickly and with great adoption?
Yeah, that's really driven by our hiring managers and our talent acquisition team that talk about the culture of inclusion here and why we focus on self-ID. So that's where I'm saying that inclusion is everyone's accountability at the bank. And so we really focus that effort at the candidate level about our culture of belonging and inclusion.
Thank you. And I know Eric shared the onboarding toolkit. Did you have a follow-up question on that as well?
A little bit less around that than on the leadership participation in this, and particularly around storytelling. I know that I've talked to some other CDOs who said that what was very impactful for their self-ID program was, say, having someone on the leadership team, like a senior leader, who would come out and either identify LGBTQIA or identify with a disability and tell their story and their how it's impacted and living as they are, bringing their whole self to work at the organization. Do you have stories like that you share?
Absolutely. That's actually foundational to our self-ID program, is that leaders, if they choose, will participate in that and why they self-ID. An example, last year, I did a fireside chat with our US CEO, and we had 5 employees also tell their stories of why they self-ID. And all are all varied stories, and some with visible and a lot with invisible levels of ability or disability. So it's critical that employees hear, and that's helped build, help build our program, is that we've had leaders who identify as 2S LGBTQIA as well, and tell their story of why it's important for them, because they're all role models within the organization, no matter how we identify. And so from our CEO, our BMO Financial Group CEO, and our US CEO, and all of the leadership team, and also at the front lines. So at our branch level, our branch managers, why they count themselves in, our CSRs, why they count themselves in, is critically important. And we do it by video, because we're finding that the most effective medium, like that 90-second video, why I count myself in.
Yeah. And one other question, this was going back to how you count, or what groups that you count specifically. How do you deal with the multidimensional aspect of employee self-ID? Somebody who's got a disability, LGBTQ, race, gender, all of that. What kind of selection criteria and how do you set that up?
So they can choose any and all. So if there's an intersectional basis, if you're based on race and any of the other factors, they're all individual questions on the questionnaire itself. So you can have multidimensional. When we do our roll up, because we've publicly disclosed 9 of our goals, aspirational workforce goals, of how we'd like to represent the organization relative to our customer segments. It's all rolled up from a data reporting perspective in aggregate, but I have the option to multi-select in different ways that I identify.
And I've had some questions come up specifically in the last couple of years around how people are reporting or asking people to report gender and gender identity. Can you tell specifically how you do that at BMO?
So assigned gender is foundational with our benefits and pension plan. So that's an automatic. Gender identity, we have a multi-select. So when you click on gender identity, there is a whole list of the varied ways people identify, and they have the option to select in there as well. And that has been built over time, and that continues to evolve over time. And our Pride ERG is instrumental in providing us with advice and counsel on the correct nomenclature under gender identity and sexual orientation.
Thank you.
Thank you. For folks who are maybe just seeing that first step of this journey, and you over this multi-decade experience have probably built a full staircase by now. How long into the journey before you really started to see measurable impact and success?
Well, I can only talk about the last 3 years. It's been significant focus. So prior to that, it was we didn't have the technology, and it was basically reporting on what was required from a regulatory perspective. And we started to build and build and build. So it's over time. Like we said, we started in 2011, our first self-ID. So it's been a build, and the progress has been incredible. And the last 3 years, we've really had doubled down because we have a technology that is able to support it. We have a very active ERG program, which we've always had. Our ERG program started 40 years ago, by the way.
Wow.
So it's very well entrenched in the organization, but really been able to brand it and being very transparent over the last 3 years. And that's how we've seen marketable increase. But it's always been there and always been a focus over time.
Well, thank you. I know we've breezed through this hour. Jackie, I want to turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina. You know, Vanessa, I don't know that we often take this opportunity to drill down so deeply into an initiative, but I think it's a testament not only to the phenomenal work you've done, but the governance that you've set up, the processes that you've set up, the structures around trust that you've been able to set up. So this is just incredible work. I would imagine that you're going to continue to get questions and queries after this call. I just want to take this time to just say thank you so much for being a guest for us today. Also for being on our CDO board. You are such a valued and esteemed member. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I will just leave you with one final question, Vanessa. What are you most proud of?
In the professional setting?
It doesn't matter. You can answer that question however you want. And I know we didn't talk about this, but what are you most proud of?
Professionally, I am extremely proud of our DEI team. Mm-hmm. And because we're far-reaching in Canada and the US, and what they do every day makes a difference. Their focus on self-ID, our development programs, our ERG program is best in class, or we consider it best in class. So that is what I am most proud of. Personally, I'm proud of my kids.
Love it.
Yeah, and they're in their 20s and they're doing so well. And so I'm proud of a lot of things, and I'm actually really proud to be part of the I4CP CDO board forum. The networking and the connections, getting to know you, Jackie, Nina, Eric, and the entire I4CP team has been phenomenal. Your research is incredible, and I know Eric is going to get into that shortly. And thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about our story. We have so much to share, and I look forward to any questions anybody has after today. We're still on the learning journey too, and it's one step at a time, one step up that staircase. So thank you so much.
Love it. No, thank you, Vanessa. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric. Although, Eric, I think Vanessa just did your close for you, but I'll turn it over to you anyway.
Yeah, stole my thunder there. That's okay. First, I wanted to thank you, Vanessa. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for sharing so much information. I really consider these self-ID programs so foundational for all the work that we do in DE&I. And honestly, I deal with a lot of member requests for information from members of our CDO board and DEI exchange. And self-ID programs are a continuous, like, perennial thing that people are asking about and want to get more structure and participation in. And 80-some% is far and away one of the best participation rates I've ever heard for a self-ID program. And let me see. So if we can show the research slide real quick. I just wanted to let everybody know that if you haven't downloaded it yet, we have I4CP's Resetting DE&I brief that's available. This goes into a lot of the issues that we're seeing now with pushback against DE&I. I can tell you that the information we collected from over 850 responses was a bit more optimistic than what we're seeing in some of the headlines out there, showing that those organizations that are truly committed to DE&I really aren't pulling back on their efforts or pulling away from the issue, that a lot of them are doubling down and a lot of them are just refocusing their efforts to where they think it will be the most inclusive for their workforce. This is information that we shared with the White House a few months ago, did this study in partnership with a meeting that we were having with them. I would highly suggest that anybody who wants to get a handle on what organizations are doing to deal with that backlash, this would be a good download for you. I think we've already posted the numbers that you would need for your HRCI credits in chat. So if anybody needs those, we have them here on this slide. These are for the HRCI and SHRM credits. You can use these codes to get credit for this meeting. And other than that, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us on this call. Nina, thank you for so much for all of the good support that you've done today in chat. Jackie, always is a wonderful host. And once more, Vanessa, thank you for being a wonderful guest.